Hey there, welcome to episode 139 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. As usual, we are recording this at 8:07 a.m., 8:07 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time here in the Greater Vegas area on Wednesday, July 8, 2026. Today's title and topic, Making Websites. If you are not familiar with the Quaggling Sand audio program, maybe this is your first time. If so, welcome. Quaggling sand is a technical term I coined when I was very young, single digits, probably under the age of 5. So it's not even clear that this is legal. I coined this term for something you probably refer to in the layman's vernacular, pins and needles. Quaggling sand is that sensation you get when circulation is returning to often a limb, a hand or a foot. Maybe you slept or sat on your foot, on your arm, as that sensation of circulation returning overtakes pins and needles, or more correctly, quaggling sand. In this case, for the purposes of this audio program, it is all about recollection, a swirling or quaggling of sand in the mind. Tales, stories, recollections, all true to the best of my memory recollection. Hopefully you find some of these interesting or exciting or informative. I don't know about exciting. Informative. Please unlock the device to... Oh, it's always awesome when Amazon wants to inject itself into a conversation. So on that note, hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief summary, 2 very short sentences, which I'll read, then the links for today's episode. The usual 2 Quaggling Sand homepage, quaggling spelled exactly as it sounds. Hopefully you noticed it on the program title for this podcast. Getting a little chia seed in the morning. Pardon me. Quaggling, Quoggling SAND, quagglingsand.com. Got a little ahead of myself there on the spelling. The profile page linking everything has been around for over 5 years now. 5.25 years about. buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. You do not need to spend any money there. You can if you want. There you will find my freeform profile page. I don't have to maintain buymeacoffee.com. It can look as good or bad as it wants. It's not in my control. The buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile page links to all of my audio programs. It includes some biographical information if you're curious, my various audio programs and various places where they may be found. Pretty much audio at this point. That could change. All of our programs, me, myself, and I, are also available on YouTube as YouTube podcasts. The nice thing about that, the YouTube platform does a automatically generated and free written transcript of the audio programs. So if you need to read these audio programs, you can find the transcripts there. They may not be 100% perfect, but they're better than nothing. That sums up YouTube, right? Do check that out, and remember that on Monday mornings, every Monday morning, there's a 5-minute Buy Me an Update audio program. It used to be published exclusively at buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts, but nobody goes to Buy Me a Coffee for podcast episodes. So it is published 2 hours later on all the usual places. It is named Buy Me an Update, though, because of that initial exclusivity. That was not a partnership or an arrangement of any kind. It was just something to try. Buy Me an Update. Not brought to you by Buy Me a Coffee. Brought to you by you. Brought to you by you? Yeah, by me. Finally, the third and final link for today, the Wayback Really Cool page. If you're familiar with archive.org and the Wayback Machine, you can look at a website as far as they have it in their archives far back. So reallycool.com was my first domain. Thus, it was the first place where I was trying out some ideas for websites, content, and whatnot. It goes all the way back to 1996. Check it out if you want. So, did I read the summary? The summary of today's episode. Way back in the day, the web was new, HTML was weird, and it was indeed the wild, wild west. Hand coding web pages was the way. Still is, really, when you think about it. So let's begin. I was working at Netscape when I got started. Technically, I'm going to call an audible here. Technically, I was working at Apple, my first job at Apple, when I first downloaded the Mosaic web browser on advice of a college friend of mine who said, "Hey, have you seen this Mosaic thing?" That was my first exposure to the web, Mosaic in all of its glory. I think I actually looked at Gopher pages. Where is Gopher when we need it? So that was the old days. That was way back. I think 1993. But my employment at Netscape, not when I first got my domain in 1996. We'll get to all that, but it was when I was working at Netscape that I first, I guess I could say, had an opportunity, maybe, because I was not a front end developer. Anyway, let's get started. I was working on smart card stuff. I've talked about this in a previous episode of this program, when an opportunity to join Netscape in their security group fell into my lap. Think encryption, SMIME, secure multi-part internet mail extensions, SSL, secure socket layer, all the bugs that you were finding forever. Those were coming out of my group, although I did not work on SSL specifically. The smart card knowledge, though, helped. My sense was that they were just checking to make sure I had a pen and I was not a monster. This is something they could have done in Maine, perhaps. A little side note. My time at Netscape began. I don't remember if I had been exploring page authoring. I didn't get my own domain until 1996. I was actually working at Apple at the time in the Newton group. I've talked about this also in a previous episode, when I purchased my very first, and still my LLC, Limited Liability Corporation, domain name, reallycool.com. But really cool consulting, really cool technologies now here in Vegas, etc. When I really got it to maintain an email address that would move with me, hosting was a bit of a mess back then. I had a Netcom account for what that was worth. I left Apple to work at SEM Microsystems, as I described in that previous episode. Smart cart, I think it was chip cards, to work at SEM on the smart cards. So that was the reason I started working for this German company, German/French, but German. And I was only there for a few months. I want to say it was like 4 months or something. It sucked. I got to be honest. Definitely on the list of places I did not enjoy working at the end of the day. In fact, the domain, reallycool.com, was purchased by me on March 12, 1996. It's still in the, if you look up the Whois record for reallycool.com, there it is. And I went to France for SEM around Easter. So I bought the domain in March when I was at the Newton Group. I went to France for SEM. It was around Easter time, same year. So it was a tight timeline because I would then leave SEM, go to Netscape a few months later in 1996. 1996 was the year of many changes and my introduction to authoring a website. So I was off to Netscape in the fall, and I was getting to be about time to figure out how the web worked, an appropriate company to work at or with. I was an employee to figure all that out. So now I was in a software engineering group working on core technologies, the core technologies group. If you were a Netscape alum, I don't know if you would remember me, but I worked for Jeff Winter, and our group worked for David Stryker. Good times. David Stryker, you can't really get a better name than that. So I didn't spend much time on the front end. I wasn't really there to work on user interface or anything like this. I wasn't really authoring content of any kind, but we did have a home directory that we could place content in, and it would be published automatically to the public directory, which people around the world could stumble upon now and then. And this was like there was an about URL in the browser, like an Easter egg that linked back to your homepage associated with, about, I think it was about : D Hugo, about : JWZ, or etc. So these would take you to a particular destination on the Netscape website. So you'd have like an employee homepage section. So I did that, and I actually did occasionally, it was infrequent, but I actually did have people contact me now and then from other parts of the world. So that was kind of cool. And I just had the most basic page published. I've never really checked to see if my Netscape page is in the archive. Maybe I'll do that later. It's not the focus of today's episode, but it was the beginning. So I was mostly messing around at first. I was not a user interface designer. I wasn't really a content creator back then, arguably still the case. There were tools by, say, Claris for the Mac. I wrote here, I think, for the Mac, but we can confirm that. Claris, whatever that tool was. Adobe was trying to do something with some sort of page creation. These were the early days, a lot of weird graphical editors. What you see is what you get editors, allowing drag and drop placement of buttons and tables and whatnot. Tables, for those too young to remember the good old days, were the way you formatted your web pages. And that was okay at the time, since there were no mobile devices with narrow screens. You didn't have to worry about accommodating a variety of screen widths, a huge variety. And what do you call it? It's not degrading, is it? The page, that's features. What do you call what's the word? I'm totally spacing on it. When you, the page accommodates the size. I'm spacing on the term. It's a common term. You can see I'm totally into front end. But so tables were okay at the time. There were no mobile devices with no screens. You didn't have to, what's the word? I'm going to pause. I'm going to check it out. It's bothering me. Okay, we're back. I cannot believe I could not remember the word responsive. So yeah, you didn't have to worry about responsive design. Well, you did have to worry about it. You just didn't know it yet. So screens in that day and age, 640 by 480 was not uncommon. But I think the target, if I remember correctly at that time, so this was 1996, 97, was XGA, 1024 by 768, and maybe you would have a 1280 by 1024 if you were working with like somebody who was, well, if you had a large monitor, right? Not normal people were probably more at the 1024 by 768, and then there were still people doing 640 by 480, 13-inch typical monitor size. Sorry, I had to pause there real quick. It didn't get too much crazier than that at scale, so it's not like everybody out in the world was using some unusual sizes. So you pretty much targeted your web designs for 1024 by 768, and then you could make it fit. Obviously, it would fit on a 1280. And if you were rocking a 640 by 480, you were scrolling side to side. In my day job, there were opportunities to try out the latest toys, whether the JavaScript stuff Brendan was working on over the cube wall. I did sit, 20 feet away from Brendan when he worked at Netscape, and I did too. Or some minor UI inside JavaScript dialogues for our S-MIME stuff. I actually worked on that. I was slowly but surely becoming familiar with HTML as it was at the time. These were the old days. And I began to find manually authoring the page structure and content was much easier than using graphical editors. That was the end of that. You can see in my very first Wayback entry for reallycool.com. So if you visit the link above and you go all the way back to 1996, the page content was centered text and links, very boring. And it was created on my Mac at the time using Claris homepage tools. Not for long though. It was at Netscape, by the way, that I built my first computer. It was a dual Pentium Pro machine. I would eventually get a big 21-inch monitor from my days at Supermac. It was like a trade show used, can't sell it as new, any open box basically. And it was, hey, you want one of these monitors? We're basically getting rid of them. So it was a kind of an in-kind swap. So I had a nice big monitor attached to what would become my first Linux machine, and the joy of editing text files instead of GUI tools, because there were no graphical user interface. No WYSIWYG drag and drop tools for web page layouts and stuff back in those days on Linux. But the Netscape browser did have a page authoring feature in Communicator, I think, if I remember correctly. I don't think I ever used that. It was pretty bad. So yeah, I was testing out the toys and everything, and good times. At the time, I was busy and did not have so much time to, say, learn how to make web pages look nice. And I also didn't have much to say anyway. So it wasn't like I was itching to publish my various written works. Not back then anyway. That would come later. Things have changed since, but at the time, it was not my goal in life to create web pages. Just another thing to become familiar with in the context of my work at the time. and what was clearly going to be something interesting moving forward. I think that was probably a pretty good guess. When I was at Netscape, there was a Shoutcast became popular. Well, it became a thing. It became something you could actually use. And so the Shoutcast icon on, there was some sort of a toolbar thing or something. So Shoutcast was popular. People would listen to Shoutcast content, I guess, when they're with their headphones around the office. So practicality enters the picture. I would depart Netscape for UMax Computer Corporation, partially for the opportunity to capitalize on an eventual IPO. I don't know what it is. When I'm writing these episodes, I really don't pay attention to. So I wrote eventually IPO, but it was an eventual IPO, not an eventually IPO, which is ridiculous. So stream of consciousness doesn't always work. By the way, the IPO never happened either. So that's that. But after the Netscape experience with so many people I was working with having done the same for when Netscape went public, and when they did go public, there was much rejoicing. But also partially because I was particularly interested in the new computer hardware designs that UMax was working on. Chirp, Common Hardware Reference Platform. No, that was actually became PrEP, the PowerPC Reference Platform. Capital P, capital R, small e, big P. But no, then it became PowerPC Platform, PPCP. And that was going to be it. You could run all kinds of operating systems on it and whatnot. That I had been working on so many Unix variants and building our core stuff for Windows, Mac, Unix, Linux, and whatever else was basically my foot in the door with the UMax folks. Some of my SuperMac connections were also working at UMax. So that was sort of a, hey guys, my former colleagues. Another case where an interview almost seemed like a formality. Those are the good old days of Silicon Valley. I had to pause to get some more chia water. I didn't think you wanted to listen in on that. That said, the formality. That said, it was true here as well here at UMax. There at UMax, it was true there as well. That was just being in the moment while I was writing. So being there as well. I was working on the system and not working on the front end or website or anything else of that kind. That didn't mean I didn't dabble a little bit. Sorry. Morning weather changes, I guess. You can hear my voice. You know what's up. So it didn't mean I didn't dabble in learning how web pages and what to make them look like and so on. At one point, I wrote a CGI, that's Common Gateway Interface script. I wrote the script to perform a customer lookup for fulfillment update on a scanner promotion that UMax was running with UMax Technologies, UTI. Perfect name, of course. But so people would, hey, where's my scanner? So we would point them to this webpage. And let's be honest, back then nobody had any idea. So there was basically, they posted an entire spreadsheet of content that you could just look at and see if your name was in it. So it had everybody's contact information and whatnot. Pretty horrible. So I wrote the CGI script that would look people up in the spreadsheet that they had. A workaround to be sure, but at least you weren't handing everyone's email address to anyone. Ridiculous. Just ridiculous. The old days. UMax Technologies Incorporated, UTI, was a scanner company. UCC, UMax Computer Corp, was making computers, but of course it was really a scanner company making computers. That's how customers would view that. The rest of my first tour in Silicon Valley, so that was from 1993 to 2001, was pretty much hardware. I'm trying to think. I mean, when I worked at Apple in the Newton Group, that was a software role, but it was still working on new Newton hardware. So kind of touching hardware all the time, not really the web. With Philips and Leapfrog rounding out the time until I moved back to Arizona in August of 2001. Aside from dealing with the global IT department at Philips, that was fun. I really had zero interaction with the web-facing stuff at any of the places I was working. For the first tour, actually. I mean, the Netscape stuff, obviously Netscape was internet, but I wasn't really doing content or customer facing anything. So everything I was doing was on my own time, side gig, side project, not even a gig, side projects and so on. With, I think, 90 to 100% of my time was spent hands-on in product development on particular projects, and those were usually hardware adjacent, hardware related, tangible things. So I would turn towards the web after I moved. While I was with Netscape, we had some of the earliest views on what they called DHTML, dynamic HTML, DHTML, which would a couple of years later morph into Web 2.0 as more people adopted it. It kind of became more, well, DHTML was entirely Netscape. So there was more of a, you don't get to control all that. That's for Google to do later. More JavaScript, more creativity with presentation and movement on web pages, animations, and so on. Elements of the DHTML demos that we saw where content would leave the browser bounds, floating, moving around. So it's pretty neat, a lot of eye candy, as they used to call it. The advent of Ajax to pull data within a page so you didn't have to reload whole pages and so on. CSS was coming on strong over this, the early days, but it was going to be a thing. Pretty cool. More. So I was seeing all this stuff, but I was not doing it. And not that I do that stuff now, but when I moved back to Phoenix, just before September 11th, as it turns out, I had every intention of consulting remotely, continuing the work I was doing, but not in very expensive Silicon Valley. I had the cable modem installed. I had my office set up in one of the bedrooms of the house I rented in a place in Phoenix that was desert when I was living in Phoenix before that. And suddenly the world turned itself off for a while come September 12th. So it was time to see what was up with this whole web thing. Options. Quick pause there. I became somewhat savvy with PostgreSQL. I've learned a lot since then, so I would say I became like a PostgreSQL expert. But I basically made the decision back in 2002, 2003-ish, that PostgreSQL was my favorite database because everybody should have one. While I was wandering around Phoenix looking for jobs with a Silicon Valley salary history that made people, one person actually laughed out loud. I mean, if you ask the question and I answer it, that's the answer. It's not a joke. I gave, because Silicon Valley paid better than Phoenix. I gave up even mentioning that detail, and eventually it became clear that the post 9/11 job market was a bit off and it was time to be creative. I dove into the conversion of ideas into online something or other, whether it was a web page or a website or a web-based application back then, data-driven websites, I guess is what they would be called back then. So this is where I learned firsthand, no question, that I have no aesthetic sensibility. I don't think anybody could argue with that. What I discovered during my time in Phoenix was that I can do the hard work of coding the back end and hand coding HTML, and I can do all this stuff. I can hand code HTML and structure the document so it passes any sort of validation tests. Remember when there used to be XHTML validation, and you'd have a little icon on your page. This is a valid XHTML. But at the end of the day, I'm not really creative. I'm not really so creative anyway, when it comes to what a page or general theme should look like. I appreciate an attractive web design, an appealing theme, a thought out layout, right? Where the eye is drawn, where the buttons should be, some visual flourish to demarcate different parts of a page, help with your visual navigation if you are looking at the page. I just can't do it. This was around 2005 when I basically got that message that my ideas were not translating into something that looked nice. Function, okay. Look, not so much. More chia water. Sorry. I'm starting to, sometimes in previous episodes, I would pause, do something, then come back. And I think in the final MP3 file, some of those pauses would appear as like cuts. Technically they are cuts, but it wasn't like an edit. It was a pause. So I pause recording. And then when I come back, there's usually an artifact. So just so you know. So I did when I realized, okay, I'm not really a visual person when it comes to web content and whatnot. But I did, though, become interested in and more capable of doing front-end view generation programmatically. And while the world was leaning on PHP back in those days, which is unfortunate but true, everything would get easier for me when the long running back end applications became more practical and like people just started doing that. They were not difficult, really. So it was just a matter of diving in and learn how it all worked. And then there's been more adoption since then. Like, it used to be, oh yeah, PHP, everything else. If you write a Java thing, you got to use Tomcat and you got to use, there were some other things. So it became very complicated because long running applications were intended for enterprise development, right? Big company stuff. And, oh, you just want to throw up a web page? PHP, that's all you need. Not strictly true, but PHP became super popular. In the meantime, I really liked the ability to write an application that would just run, and then basically the web server would ask it for like, I'm going to make a page and show it to somebody. So that's a quick description. So I got all that figured out, but so I moved back to Silicon Valley. So in order to do that, I took a job with salon.com. I've talked about this before. Did include some front end work. Not everything, but it was part of it. We had a web designer who designed the page layout, but I was not yet adept. Well, they decided to use PHP for this new thing that I was working on. So PHP to generate pages. So PHP is embedded in the HTML or vice versa. So it's not my favorite way to do things, but it was definitely a learning experience. The PHP code behind the pages that were generated was ugly. I did not like what I came up with for platform components that I worked on, the parts of the salon.com website back then. All that stuff's long gone. Don't even worry about it. They became, and I actually said, you should use WordPress to build this site. You're not a web company. You're not developing amazing new technologies. You're publishing journalism. So this and my consulting gigs just after departing Salon were really showing me that I am not a web designer. Not by any means. I can build a website. That's easy. I can make it function. I'll pull data out of a database and put it on a page. I mean, things like this, or do user initiated operations and so on. So I can do the mechanics. That part is totally fine, but it doesn't look nice. Typically, at least that was back then. I was far more, and you can look at the Quaggling Sand homepage. It's one page. Now, in the case of the Quaggling Sand homepage, I really wanted to have something there to test to make sure everything was working. And then, okay, you can find the latest episode. But as far as making it look nice, that's something I've basically lowered in priority for the past few months, too many months. I'm just not an inspired web designer. To be correct, I'm a web developer, among other things, but certainly not a web designer. I can write the code, but it will be ugly. So yeah, this is my consulting after departing. I'm not a web designer. I'm not by any means. I can do the mechanics. That part is fine, but it doesn't look nice. I was far more interested in content transformation pipelines. So I was making use of XML and XSLT. So XML, Extensible Markup Language, and XSLT is XML Style Language Transforms. I believe that's correct. So I would transform documents between this and that, and this even made an appearance. This was still when I was still living in Phoenix. On our home information systems CDs that we would deliver to customers, I would always include the source XML document, which was essentially the database of everything that was cataloged for a new construction project. And then I would generate. And so all this stuff was included on the CD, so anybody could regenerate anything. And this was when the vision was, oh yeah, these will be around forever, and it'll transfer to the new owner of a home and so on. It's what made the home, all the paints and tiles and manufacturers and support for services and everything. Photos, pre-drywall photos. It was a good idea. Just could have been implemented better. So it made an appearance on the CD so we can convert the XML source. It was basically the database of stuff in the house with all the information about the construction project, and so we could transform that into HTML pages. Like I got kind of adept at generating full websites with subdirectories and links back and all this stuff. It was pretty, there was a learning curve, but it was pretty interesting. The content was, first of all, it was intended to be as minimalist as possible so that it would work. I didn't need to get too fancy. It was something you would only look at now and then. my attempt at future-proofing as web technologies evolved. One of these days I should try to find an old, this is before GitHub and whatnot, so all the sources for all this stuff is probably long gone, but I might have a CD somewhere. I should try to see if I can pull that off and see what it does, pull the content off the CD. As a matter of fact, the XML sources on those CDs would still work just fine to transform into modern HTML4 or whatever else. I would just have to modify the XSLT transforms, but the XML source document would still be totally fine today. So that was the idea. So what about today? So jumping ahead, so literally today, I've learned a ton about page layout and whatnot, and their accessibility. Now it's called WCAG, which I don't know what that stands for. It used to be YARIA, but that's now, there's a superset of standards and tests and checks and so on for accessibility. Paused. I think those are critical. I think more people should spend more time on that stuff, including me. So there are so many different ways to automate and dynamically construct views, which pages. Views are a sort of more of a programmer's take on what a web page is. A view on the data. What do I want it to look like? And it could be a part of a larger view and all that stuff. So it's almost more difficult now to select something to use, some tool stack, as they call them, than it is to actually build the stuff that you want to build. So some people have taken to doing their own frameworks or their own methodology or vanilla. Like, don't use frameworks, just write the code and all this. Okay, fine. The back end, though, the back end is, and I hesitate to say this, but here it is easy compared to making a front end that works. You really don't want to claim that something in computers is easy. The AI will do that for us, unfortunately. But the back end, you don't have to worry about user interactions and so on. You're interacting with data, not clicks and back buttons and all these sorts of things. And this makes sense. And that is appealing and that is maintainable, the back end stuff, right? You're writing an application that happens to talk to the front end to make web pages. So I'm okay with that. I have at least a dozen ideas. Some have been around forever, for way too long. They're all web-based, or at least cloud-based, if you like. And by the way, I would never build a native application for one of the big two mobile phone platforms, unless I really had to. Never say never, put an asterisk on that. But I actually did, when I got my Android One, a classic device. I wish they, it was too big and bulky, but had some good ideas. So I actually did develop Android applications when I first got the phone, and they had the free SDK and all that software developer kit. So I was learning how to build Android applications way back when. Then I started working at Palm, so that the Palm Pre WebOS was back to building web pages. So the user interface was mostly built on JavaScript and HTML. So you didn't have to build a native application, so to speak, right? You're not compiling. So I did that. I don't think it's for most of what I want to accomplish, everything I'm doing would be data centric and then presenting some information in a useful way, but it doesn't have to be an application so much as a web application, right? I think I've mentioned the Android and then to Palm thing that happened. If not, that's another story for another time. In the modern era, most of what needs to be done can be accomplished as a progressive web app or whatever they call in the modern day this, like single page app, multi-page app. They're JavaScript and HTML, right? It can run on your phone. There's no need to deal with multiple build targets. You don't have to get the Apple iPhone SDK and then the Android SDK and then whatever else comes along. For the most part, mobile browsers have come pretty close to desktop browsers for features and functions, at least the stuff you really need, and one website to rule them, so to speak. So I can build one website that's mobile responsive. So it'll work on a mobile, even the M, hang on a second. Okay, so for a while it was popular, and you still see this, it's still out there. There'd be like www.website.com or something. And then there'd be m.website.com. Oh, that's the mobile version. But it's less and less necessary to do that. You just have responsive web page layout. So adapts itself to the size of the screen. And then ideally, because when you do that, when you have a mobile version of your website, people would start to cut back on the feature set. Like, oh, in a mobile browser, you don't need to access all of the features that you do on a, well, that's dumb. So I literally, as an example, I literally visit the LinkedIn website because I hate their mobile app. It's too tracky. So I use the LinkedIn website from a mobile device, and I use it in desktop mode because they disable too many things in the mobile mode. So I just have the browser identify itself as a desktop browser, and everything works fine to the extent that LinkedIn is useful, which I hate that platform. So all that said, the capabilities of mobile web browsers have really brought to the fore the need to be somewhat savvy, or at least capable of designing for a web-based interaction with your users. It is the future. Unfortunately, AI is going to be doing that for people, which I think is horrible. But yeah, one website to rule them. I personally don't have AI doing any of my stuff for me as far as code generation or authoring. Cover art, I've already described this. I use Gemini mostly, or whatever else. I have a Canva account, so Canva has some AI features. If I need a particular thing in a piece of cover art to realize what I would like it to look like, I'll say, hey, create an image with an astronaut on a horse on the moon. Remember those? But as far as coding, I don't like the AI taking over everything because it's basically using the work of others and then spitting it back out at you. I don't think that's a good idea. So I continue to learn while others hand that task over to AI, which I think is problematic. Anyway, I will end here with this final point that I still have no sense of aesthetics. Black text on a white background works fine, and it's high contrast and probably WCAG compliant. So anything I create is going to be functional and ugly, and that is the way it is. So I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much for listening, as usual, as always. Hopefully now you have a little teeny tiny bit of insight as to why quaglingsand.com still looks ugly. Every once in a while I think, oh wait, I have a few minutes, but it's more than a few minutes, and I have to design some sort of nice look and feel. And I don't, even though I tend to use the same, we'll call it a template or a layout, because I'll get this done. But that's not really ideal. I would like the websites to reflect something about the personality of the content or what the website is about, obviously. So using the same template all the time is not my favorite. If you look at innovateforvegas.org, innovateforvegas.foundation, innovateforvegas.xyz, they're all the same website. The content moves around a little bit, but they're all the same website because I just took the HTML that I had defined already. They should be templated. The styling should be much more flexible. There should be a little bit of personality reflected as far as what the .org website is versus the .foundation website. They are different. So this is all part of a longer process that I need to become more proactive in. But I have code to write and I have a ton of other things to do. So yeah, it's all on the list. But I do appreciate you listening as always and listening to the end, which is amazing. Good on you. Do check out the buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile page for links to all of my other productions. Listen in. There might be something interesting that you've never discovered before, or maybe you already listened to those. That'd be wonderful. On that note, I'll let you go. Take care. We'll catch you next week, or maybe you'll choose to listen to some of my other various audio programs. Be safe and enjoy a long, hot summer. Bye-bye.